Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala nabina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajmain. So welcome brothers and sisters to the weekly lecture series. For those who are tuning in and under the impression that we would be continuing our series, Spiritual Care for the Quarantined. As I mentioned last week, on Saturdays, we're dedicating this particular day for a little bit longer presentation, preparing ourselves for the coming blessed month of Ramadan. And in this particular segment, as we did last week, we will be taking a close look and contemplating the verses related to the prescription of fasting from the Quran. And as we mentioned last week, those verses are verses 183 through 187 of Surah Al-Baqarah, the second surah of the Quran. And last week we discussed in detail the first of these ayat, ayah number 183, the statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in which He says, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu kutiba alaykum as-siyamu kama kutiba ala alladhina min qablikum la'allakum tattaqun. O you will believe, fasting has been prescribed upon you as it was prescribed upon those who came before you, so that you might obtain piety, God consciousness, taqwa. And we talked about that, as I said, in detail, and now we will be going to ayah number, or transitioning to ayah number 184. And that is the statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in which He says, أَيَّامًا مَعْدُودَاتٍ فَمَنْ كَانَ مِنْكُمْ مَرِيضًا أَوْ عَلَى سَفَرٍ فَعِدَّةٌ مِنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخَرٍ وَعَلَى الَّذِينَ يُطِيقُونَهُ فِدْيَةٌ طَعَامُ مِسْكِينٍ فَمَنْ تَطَوَّعَ خَيْرًا فَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَهُ وَأَنْ تَصُومُوا خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ إِن كُنْتُمْ تَعْلَمُونَ. Which means a limited number of days. So whoever amongst you is ill or on a journey during those days, he may postpone the fasting and make up the days missed from other days. As for those who are able to fast but do so with hardship, they suffer hardship when fasting, a concession is granted, feeding a needy person each day instead. Whoever does good voluntarily, it is good for him or her, and fasting is better if you only knew. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the previous verse, He mentioned the obligation to fast. And as one would expect, the people who received this message from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at that time, they may have been caught off guard. They may have been a little bit afraid of whether or not they would be able to fulfill this obligation, and also were not totally clear on what that obligation could potentially mean. So when Allah says, Kutiba alaykum as-siyam, fasting has been prescribed upon you, fasting, what does that mean? Fasting all day? Fasting perpetually? Meaning that in order to be Muslim, every day you have to be basically observing fast. Fasting becomes something perpetual, something part and parcel of being a Muslim, observed every day by every Muslim, regardless of his circumstances. They became a little nervous, perhaps. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of His mercy, He responded to that nervousness, that anxiety. And He says, أَيَّامًا مَعْدُودَاتٍ. He says a fixed number or a limited number of days. To make it clear that these days that they have to fast, it's not a perpetual fast, but it is a fast which is extremely easy to observe and very doable, because it is a limited number of days which they're required to observe it. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says this, and it's an indication of something which is consistently mentioned throughout the Quran. That Allah, and it was also mentioned in these series of ayat as well, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not want to make the lives of His worshippers miserable. He does not want to make our lives miserable. He does not want to impose upon us difficulties and hardships which are beyond our scope, beyond our human capacity. But rather, He prescribes these acts of worship to purify us, and in this particular case, the case of fasting, as a means for us to obtain piety, as He says in the previous verse, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, so that you might obtain piety. So the intention is for you to fast for a specific period of time that will allow you to obtain this very important quality of piety, God consciousness, and the fear of Allah, and the compliance, the commitment to complying to His religious teachings. Then Allah follows that up by saying, فَمَنْ كَانَ مِنْكُمْ مَرِيضًا أَوْ عَلَى سَفَرٍ فَعِدَّةٌ مِنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخَرٍ. Again, underscoring the fact that Allah doesn't want to make things difficult. He wants to make things easy. Not only did He make it just a few days that we have to fast, He also grants a concession for those who might find specific difficulty or particular difficulty in fasting. So not only does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy by giving it a specific term, but He also grants concessions to people who might experience particular hardship if they fast, like those who are sick, those who are ill, and those who are traveling. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this ayah, He lets us know that al-marad was-safar, He lets us know that illness and traveling are what we call illatan. They are two legal justifications for not fasting, two legal excuses not to fast. And one of the qawaid, one of the maxims that the scholars of Islam have adopted is the maxim that says al-hukm yaduru ma'illatihi wujudan wa adaman, that the ruling for a particular thing, it goes hand in hand with its illah, its legal justification. If that legal justification is present, that ruling is present. And if that legal justification is absent, the ruling is absent. So this being sick and being on a journey are two legal justifications for a person not to fast during the month of Ramadan, so long as he has that illah, as long as he has that legal justification. So as long as he is sick and as long as he is traveling, he is authorized not to fast, to postpone fasting until what? Until these conditions are no longer present. But it's important to understand that there's also a wisdom. There's also a wisdom behind this ruling or this concession. And a wisdom, basically, or hikmah, is an underlying basis or rationale, like a reasoning behind something. So the reasoning behind the fact that the one who is traveling and the one who is ill, that they are allowed or given the concession by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not to fast, is because of what usually accompanies these states or these circumstances of al-mashaqqa, difficulty and hardship. And again, as we said earlier, Allah does not want to place upon us any hardship. And He says this throughout the Quran and even says it in this series of ayat, as we're going to see. But it's important also for us to understand, just in this case and generally, that we should never mix between two things. Al-illah wal-hikmah. The legal justification for something and the underlying basis or rationale or reasoning behind a ruling. Because one of them authorizes that particular ruling and one does not. So in the case of al-mashaqqa, difficulty, hardship, that, as we said, is the hikmah and it's not the illah. Allah didn't, the legal justification is not mashaqqa. The legal justification is illness and traveling. But the rationale between that legal justification is al-mashaqqa, what we anticipate or expect of difficulty and hardship. What this means is that we can't make an analogy between situations which are equally or even more so difficult or hardship that present difficulty or hardship while fasting, and then say, well, if a person who is ill or a person who is suffering or traveling is allowed to break their fast, this person who also experiences difficulty should be able to break their fast as well. So sometimes what happens, brothers and sisters, you have people, for example, when they work very strenuous jobs. A person might work in a factory, and that factory is very hot, especially during the summer. And the person is a manual laborer, so they're working a lot with their hands and using their strength, exerting a lot of energy. And so they say, well, when I'm fasting, I feel even more tired and less able to do my job. I experience mashaqqa. I experience difficulty and hardship. And so I should be able to break my fast because the people who are ill and the people who are traveling experience mashaqqa and they're allowed to break their fast. No, brothers and sisters, because as we said, there's a difference between al-hikmah wal-illah. Al-mashaqqa is a hikmah, it's not the illah. It's not the legal justification for breaking the fast. So what that means is that a person who is working manual labor would still have to what? Would still have to fast and could not use their manual labor job and what they feel is an additional level of hardship because they're fasting while working manual labor, that they should also be allowed to break their fast. I just wanted to make that point because it's not uncommon for people to make this analogy in their mind and then authorize themselves not to fast. A few other points related to this ayah, or this part of the ayah, is that what type of marad, what type of illness will authorize a person to break their fast? The marad, the illness which authorizes a person to break their fast, is not just any and every marad. So first, for example, a person might have a mild cold and they're considered sick, but that mild cold, that scratchy throat, that runny nose, okay, that fogginess from basically congestion would not allow that person or authorize that person to break their fast. But rather, the scholars of Islam have said that the type of illness that authorizes a person to break their fast is one which one expects or anticipates to recover from. But when they fast, it presents an additional hardship. It makes the fasting extremely hard, much harder than it would be if they didn't have that illness. Much harder. I underscore the word much harder, because obviously any illness is going to be harder to fast with that illness than without it. But this is a type of illness which makes it much harder to fast when it's present. Also, it's a marad, an illness that if you fast, it's likely to what? To get worse. It's likely to worsen. And it's also likely to slow your recovery, to delay your recovery. If these conditions exist, that is the type of illness which authorizes a person not to fast, to break their fast, or makes them excused from fasting. So, for example, let's say that a person had a respiratory infection and they were taking antibiotics. They had a mild respiratory infection. They were taking antibiotics. And if they were to fast and suspend the taking of those antibiotics, it could get what? It could get worse. It could get worse to the point that it becomes full-scale pneumonia. The person's life becomes at risk. They may have to be hospitalized. Or at the very least, if they're taking the antibiotics inconsistently and not on the schedule as prescribed, their recovery will be delayed. In a case like this, that person would be authorized to break their fast. What about a safar? What type of traveling will authorize a person to break their fast? The scholars of Islam have differed about this, obviously, just like they've differed about the distance which authorizes a person to travel. Allah knows best. If a person sets out from his home with the intention of traveling and they travel 48 miles or more, that person is considered a traveler in the deen of Allah and therefore authorized to break their fast. And this is the opinion of a number of the companions of Muhammad ﷺ, among them Abd'Llah ibn Abbas and Abd'Llah ibn Umar. They were both of the opinion that a person who travels this distance, and they based this upon the practice of the Prophet ﷺ in their own presence, that person is a traveler and is authorized to break their fast and to shorten their prayers. And this is the opinion of Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala, Ash-Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala, and Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala. طيب. Also, as we mentioned regarding illness, likewise we mentioned regarding traveling, that traveling itself, by itself, is the legal justification for al-fitr, for al-iftar, for a person abstaining from fasting during Ramadan. And it doesn't matter if the form or the mode of transport or travel is murih, is something which is comfortable and it does not contain any difficulty. So nowadays people, for example, they may travel in planes, they may travel in trains, they may travel in different modes of transport which does not involve a great deal of hardship and difficulty and challenges to the body, etc. But even then, those people, because they are traveling and traveling is a legal justification, they are authorized to break their fast. And no one should say, oh, you can't break your fast now because what? Our modes of transport and our means of travel nowadays are very relaxing. They're very comfortable, and therefore you can't break your fast. Now there's another question that comes. It's a common question. Suppose a person has one of these conditions which authorizes them to break their fast during the daytime. So for example, a person comes, it's Fajr time, and they're ill. A person is traveling at the time of Fajr, the time where the fast would would initiate the fast. And at that time, they have one of these conditions which authorize them to break their fast. But sometime during the day, that particular condition subsides and is no longer present. So, for example, a person who was traveling arrives at his home around dhuhr. He returns home from traveling at dhuhr time. Or a person who was ill in the morning. For example, let's say that he woke up, he had some stomach illness, some stomach bug, and he was vomiting, let's say. Azakumullah. And by dhuhr, he felt fine. He felt fine. The issue had subsided, and he felt strong, and he felt able to what? To fast. Are those people who their condition, which they had during the early part of the day, existed and authorized them to break their fast? Once that condition subsides, are they now required to begin fasting? The scholars of Islam, of course, have differed. But Allah knows best. The correct opinion is that if a person started the day not fasting, they continue that day not fasting. And then they resume the fast the following day. And this is supported by the statement of Abd'Llah ibn Mas'ud, in which he said, "Man akala awwal an-nahar falyakul akhirahu." He said, whoever ate during the first part of the day, then let him eat at the last part of the day. Meaning that there is no real benefit in fasting half of a day, because that person at the end of the day, that day will not count for them. And the only exception to that is a person who accepted Islam during the daytime of Ramadan. That person obviously would begin fasting, and that day would actually count for them. ثم بعد ذلك let me see. All right, the last point that's related to this part of the ayah is that those people who have a concession, like the person who was ill or the person who was traveling, when they have a concession that authorizes them not to fast, those people have to make up those missed days. As Allah says, فَعِدَّةٌ مِّنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخَرٍ. So let them make up the missed days from other parts of the year, from other days in that year. They have to understand, though, that they have to make up those missed days within that year, that time frame. So if they miss, for example, days from Ramadan 2019, they have to make up those days before Ramadan 2020. And if they don't do that, and the reason is because of negligence, meaning that nothing was stopping them except laziness, except procrastination, etc., and the next Ramadan comes, and they have not made up those days, not only are they required to make up those days, but they're also required to feed for every day that they have to make up a poor person as a gharama, as a penalty for their tafrit, for their negligence. And this is very important for, not to pick on the sisters by any means, but it's very important for sisters because sisters, they have specific physiological circumstances that prevent them from fasting certain days every Ramadan. And so they have to make sure that they make up those days before the next Ramadan, and that they don't procrastinate, and they don't purposely commit negligence. And as a result, they have to what? They have to not only make up those days, but feed for every day that they missed, or they have not made up, I should say, a poor person in addition to that. Then the verse, it goes on and it says, وَعَلَّذِينَ يُطِيقُونَهُ فِدْيَةٌ طَعَامُ مِسْكِينٍ. And as for those who can fast, but when they fast, they experience hardship, difficulty. It's very difficult for them to fast. They can do it, but it's very difficult and taxing. As for them, they are excused from fasting. And in place of fasting, they should pay a fidya. They should pay they should expiate for those days missed, and the expiation will be in the form of food which they give to a needy person. Ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhu, he said in the commentary on this verse, he said, هو الشيخ الكبير والمرأة الخبيرة لا يستطيعان أن يصوما فيطعمان مكان كل يوم مسكينا. He said that this ayah, it references or it refers to an elderly person who, because of age, his body's become weak and cannot tolerate fasting. Or if he fasts, it will be what? It will be very exhausting for him, or could even create some health issues for him. Likewise is the case for al-Mar'a al-Kabira, a female who has a similar circumstance. Rather than fast, they should feed a poor person for each day. or a needy person for each day. And also, this also refers to, this part of the ayah, also includes al-hamil wal-murdi', the woman who is pregnant and the woman who is breastfeeding. And we find the confirmation for this on the authority of Ibn Abbas and also on the authority of Anas, who articulated in this way. He said, Inna Allaha wada'a anil hubla wal murdi' as-sawm. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has excused, pardoned, has excused, pardoned the pregnant woman and the breastfeeding woman from fasting. They are excused and pardoned from fasting. And also included in this are those people, if you remember earlier when we talked about al-marid, the person who's ill, we said the person who is ill who's allowed to make up the mistakes is the one who has an illness, yurja bur'uhu, the one who has an illness from which he expects to recover. But what about the person who has an illness from which he does not expect to recover? That person who has an illness which he does not expect to recover from, a chronic illness, or he has an illness which for his physician or his physicians, his doctors, those who are caring for him, have basically told him not to fast because of this illness. That person is also allowed to feed instead of fasting. So basically, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, as for those who can fast but experience hardship, they are to pay a fidya and feed a needy person instead of fasting. It includes an elderly person who is unable to fast because of his age. It includes a pregnant woman, a breastfeeding woman, and also a person who has a chronic illness from which they do not expect to recover, or which doctors, healthcare professionals advise him not to fast. طيب, al-fidya, this fidya that we're supposed to pay, what is it? What form should it take? And how much should we pay? Allah knows best. There's some difference of opinion about this amongst the scholars, and in our modern time, perhaps the best and most safest thing to do is for a person to give a wajba, a meal, for every day to a needy person. It is preferred that that needy person be a Muslim. But if a person cannot find a Muslim who really is entitled or worthy of the fidya, does not fit the description of a faqir, an impoverished person, or a miskeen, a needy person, then if he does not find someone like this from the Muslims, then he can give that to a non-Muslim. But what is preferred and who should be given priority? The Muslims who fit this description. And also, it is best that for every day he feeds a different poor person. And some of the scholars have given an example. They say, for example, let's say that there is a place, like for example, a homeless shelter, or another place where a particular neighborhood where masakin can be found, poor people, needy people can be found. It is best for a person to let a certain number of days pass from Ramadan and then collect that number of needy people and feed those people a wajba, feed those people a meal. So for example, let's say that a pregnant or breastfeeding woman was not going to fast, but was going to feed in place of those days. Let 10 days pass, for example, and then go to that place where those needy people live or gather and take 10 of them and feed those 10. Let another 10 days pass and feed 10 more like that. This is what the scholars have suggested. But if a person were to select one miskeen and give that miskeen a wajba every day, a meal every day in Ramadan, that would also what? That would also work and be acceptable. Then the verse goes on, it says, فَمَنْ تَطَوَّعَ خَيْرًا فَمَنْ تَطَوَّعَ خَيْرًا فَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَهُ. But whoever voluntarily does good, it is good for him. And here, this obviously, it had a meaning when a siyam was first legislated. We talked about this last week. But once the siyams, the way that siyam was legislated changed, the meaning of this verse also what? It also changed slightly. So previously, فَمَنْ تَطَوَّعَ خَيْرًا فَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَهُ, it referenced the people who had the choice, because in the beginning when fasting was first prescribed, people were given the choice to feed or to fast. This verse is basically saying to them, whoever does more than what he's required voluntarily, it's good for him. Meaning, if you fast and feed, that will be good. If you fast and feed 2 people instead of 1, that will be good for you, etc. But now that people don't just have the option, if they don't have a concession, they have to fast. فَمَنْ تَطَوَّعَ خَيْرًا فَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَهُ. It would mean, in the case of the one who is fasting and required to fast, that if he volunteered to feed people in addition to fasting, that would be good for him, and he would get additional reward. And also for the one who is allowed not to fast but to pay fidyah instead, if that person, rather than feeding 1 person, fed 2 or fed 3, that would be khayrun lahu. That would be good for him. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says at the end of the ayah, وَأَن تَصُومُوا خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ إِن كُنتُمْ تَعْلَمُونَ. And fasting is better for you if you only knew. And so basically what that means is that you have some people who they have a concession from Allah, like the person who is traveling, or a woman who is breastfeeding, but does not fear for herself and does not fear for her child. These people, they can fast. They're allowed to fast. And so it's as if Allah is saying that if a person is able to fast, then fasting is better for them. Fasting is better for them, although they have the option not to fast. And although they have the option not to fast. But if a person is not able, they should not force themselves to fast when that is not good for them and they've been given this concession. Why? Because Allah loves it that when He gives us a concession, we take advantage of it. As the Prophet said in the hadith led by Ahmed, he said, Inna Allah ta'ala yuhibbu an tu'ta rukhsahu kama yakrah an tu'ta ma'siyatuh. He said Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves it when you take advantage of His concessions, just as He hates it when you violate or you do the things which He counted as sins. Then the second ayah that we'll cover tonight, and we'll stop after this ayah, is ayah number 185 from Surah Al-Baqarah, the third verse in the list of verses which prescribe fasting. And that is the verse where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن هدى للناس وبينات من الهدى والفرقان فمن شهد منكم الشهر فليصم ومن كان منكم مريضا أو على سفر فعدة من أيام أخر يريد الله بكم اليسر ولا يريد بكم العسر ولتكملوا العدة ولتكبروا الله على ما هداكم ولعلكم تشكرون. أنا آسف, subhanallah. طيب, so Allah, He says what means in this verse, the month of Ramadan in which the Quran was revealed, a guidance for the people, and clear proofs of guidance and the criterion between right and wrong and truth and falsehood. So whoever is a resident when the month begins, then let him fast. And whoever is ill or on a journey, then fast an equal number from other days. Allah wants ease for you, and He does not want to make things difficult. And He wants you to complete the period, to glorify Allah for that which He has guided you, for that to which He has guided you, and that you give thanks to Him. So this verse begins with the statement of Allah, شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن هدى للناس وبينات من الهدى والفرقان, in which He says that Ramadan, or the month of Ramadan, is that in which the Quran was revealed as a guidance for mankind and clarification of the guidance and the criterion. So the month of Ramadan, one of the things that Allah is highlighting here is that the month of Ramadan is the month in which the revelation of the Quran was initiated. The first verses of the Quran revealed to the Prophet ﷺ were revealed in the month of Ramadan. And it's as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is sending us a subtle message, an implicit message, that since this is the month in which the revelation of the Quran was inaugurated, then the Quran should have a very special place and should be given a great deal of attention and a great deal of concern and a great deal of importance in this month. And we see this supported by the actions of the Prophet ﷺ, the actions of his companions, Ridwanullahi ta'ala alayhim, and the actions of the early Muslims and Muslims throughout what? Throughout history. As for the Prophet ﷺ, Abd'Llah ibn Abbas, he mentioned in Sahih Bukhari, كان جبريل عليه السلام يلقى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم في رمضان حتى ينسلخ تعرض عليه النبي تعرض عليه النبي القرآن أو يعرض عليه النبي القرآن. أنا آسف. So he said, Ibn Abbas, he said Jibreel would come and he would meet with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam every day in Ramadan until Ramadan ended. Every day in Ramadan to the end of Ramadan, he would meet with what? He would meet with the Prophet ﷺ, Jibreel. And the Prophet each day would read the Quran to him, present parts of the Quran. They would revise parts of the Quran together. The Prophet would recite it, and if he made any mistakes, Jibreel would correct him. They would talk about the meaning of it, etc. All of that during what? During Ramadan. Every day in Ramadan. And in the last year of the Prophet's life, he presented or he read the Quran to Jibreel twice. As far as the early Muslims, we'll take one example, the example of Uthman ibn Affan, who he used to complete the reading of the Quran. And this is not fairy tale or legend. This is true. He used to complete the reading of the Quran every night. Every night he would have a khatmah. Uthman ibn Affan in Ramadan. Every night in Ramadan, he would read the entire Quran, radiallahu anhu. As far as the early Muslim scholars and those who we respect and love and admire, among them Imam Malik and Imam Ahmed, they used to, for example, they were big time students of the deen and big time teachers of the deen. We already know this, that they had hundreds of students, maybe thousands of students, and they themselves were avid readers and researchers of the deen to learn more so they could teach better. But in Ramadan, they would close what? They would close their books. They wouldn't read. They wouldn't study anything but the Quran. And they would stop giving fatwa. They would stop giving religious verdicts. And they would stop teaching. They would suspend their classes in Ramadan. And they would say, هذا شهر القرآن. This is the month of the Quran, the month in which our entire concern should be with, or our entire focus should be on the Quran. And Ash-Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala, just to give another example of these early Muslim scholars that we respect and honor, is that he would also complete the reading of the Quran every day, twice a day in Ramadan, once during the daytime and once at night. Sittuna khatma. He would complete the reading of the Quran 60 times in Ramadan. And this shows you this level of ihtimam. And these are our role models. These are the people that we look up to. These are the people that we're supposed to try to emulate. And this is the example that they're setting for us. And so when Ramadan comes, the Quran has to be our constant companion. We have to get off social media. We have to get off the internet. We have to turn off the TV, unplug the TV. We have to get off WhatsApp, get off, these other apps. And we have to focus our attention on the Quran. Every spare moment we have, our nose should be in the Quran, reading it, studying it, pondering it, and standing up at night, with it, etc. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He goes on and He says, فَمَنْ شَهِدَ مِنْكُمُ الشَّهْرَ فَلْيَسُمْ. And whoever amongst you is a resident during the month, and let him fast. And this is one of the clear indications of the wujub, the requirement, the obligation to fast in Ramadan if one is a resident and has no excuse or concession not to fast. Allah is clearly saying or commanding, فَلْيَسُمْ, let him fast. And this lam in the phrase is what they call lam al-amr. وَالْأَمْرُ فِي الْقُرْآنِ يَقْتَضِي الْوُجُوبِ. And a command in the Quran indicates obligation. Allah is mandating that we fast. And so we cannot excuse ourselves without a valid excuse. Nor should we be those people who actively try to create an excuse. And I'll just give a personal example that I remember in one of the Ramadans. A particular brother came to me and was asking me when did I anticipate that the month would come, and that he wanted to travel. His English was not good, and he wanted me to help him get a ticket and to make sure that he left before Ramadan started. And the reason why he wanted to leave was because he wanted to create an excuse for himself so he did not have to fast. He was actually trying to run away from fasting. We should not be those people. We have to be the people who understand that this is for our own good. Allah is not trying to make us miserable. As we said earlier, Allah is doing this for our own good. And we can't be the people who run away from something which is good for us, which is good for us. ثم بعد ذلك Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says يريد الله بكم اليسر ولا يريد بكم العسر ولتكملوا العدة. He says Allah desires for you or wants for you good, or ease. And he does not want difficulty for you. He does not want to make things difficult for you. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says he wants to make things easy, this is what he's pointing to or alluding to is the fact that he has given us these concessions, or given concessions to certain people who may experience particular difficulty. He's given concessions for them not to fast, which is a clear indication that what? That he wants to make things easy, and he does not want to burden people beyond what they can bear. It's a clear indication. Allah yuridullahu bikum al-yusra. Allah wants to make things easy, which is why what? Which is why he gave these concessions. Then he says, وَلَا يُرِيدُ بِكُمُ الْعُسْرَ وَلِتُكْمِلُ الْعِدَّةِ. But he also, in conjunction with wanting to make things easy for you, he also wants you to complete the term. He wants you to complete the term. So those people who have been given those concessions, Allah expects them to do what? To complete the term, and not to think that because they had a concession for 5 days or 10 days or 7 days from Ramadan, that they are allowed to suffice themselves with al-baqi, with whatever remained. So if they missed 5 days, 25 days is sufficient. No, Allah wants you to complete the term. He wants you to complete the term. And that's why, in addition to the concessions, he ordered فَعِدَّةٌ مِّنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخَرٍ. He ordered that you make up the days you missed from other days throughout that year, sometime in that same year. Then he says, وَلِتُكَبِّرُ اللَّهَ عَلَى مَا هَدَاكُمْ. And he also wants you to glorify Allah for that to which he has guided you. وَلَعَلَّكُمْ تَشْكُرُونَ. And he wants you to give thanks to Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us, brothers and sisters, to glorify him because of what he guided us to. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala means Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to be remembered. He wants to be honored. He wants his name to be magnified by his servants. And that encompasses the glorification and magnification of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we do at the end of Ramadan. At the end of Ramadan, the time of Eid, we make these what? We make this takbir, right? We make this takbir. That this is one example of what Allah intends when he says, وَلِتُكَبِّرُ اللَّهَ, that you make takbir of Allah. But also it means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is glorified because of his greatness in his tashri'ah, in the legislation that he gives us, his greatness in the sense that we are his servants, and we glorify him through what? Through these acts of worship. And then we complete the acts of worship, we glorify him because it's he who enabled us to complete them, etc. and so on. So this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala means when he says, وَلِتُكَبِّرُ اللَّهَ. Then he says, وَلَعَلَّكُمْ تَشْكُرُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to be thanked. He doesn't want us to show ingratitude. Thanked for what, ya ikhwan? Thanked because he has guided us. Guide us to the faith. Guide us to Islam. And then when we became Muslims, he legislated for us a method or a means to obtain something that we need. Something that's going to benefit us, at-taqwa. As he said, كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ السَّلَامُ كَمَا كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الصِّيَامُ كَمَا كُتِبَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. So that you would be pious. And you're going to benefit from that piety. So we thank Allah for that he created this means, that he legislated and created for us this means for us to what? For us to gain this taqwa, which is one of the keys to paradise and the keys to all success in this world and hereafter. And we also thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for making the fasting easy for us, although he could have made it difficult. He could have made it difficult. And when there was difficulty in it, he made it what? Easier. So we thank him for that. And we also thank him for being merciful to us. And we thank him for being merciful to us through the prescription of fasting. And fasting being another sign, another manifestation, if you will, of his mercy. And how is that so? And I'll close with this. Is that when you contemplate fasting just in general, and you ask a person, for example, what is fasting? What does fasting mean to you? Give me one word to describe fasting in Islam. Very few people would say a mercy. Very few people would say that. Very few people would think of fasting and the prescription of fasting as a mercy. But if you read the ayat, the ones that we've been studying, the ones that we've studied thus far and the ones that we have yet to study, you're going to see so many indications, so many signs, so many demonstrations of Allah's mercy upon us that, yeah, he deserves to be thanked for that. And so, for example, just ala ujala, we'll mention a few of them that we've covered thus far from the ayat that we've covered thus far. So, for example, we said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prescribed fasting. And we said specifically what that fasting is, the duration, the time duration for each day. It starts from tulu al-fajr ila ghurub al-shams. It starts from the crack of dawn to sunset. That's a mercy from Allah. Because he could have made it what? A longer duration. He could have made it for the entire day, if he willed. Also, as we talked about last week, he legislated fasting tadrijiyan, in stages. He didn't just legislate it in one go the way that we know it now, but rather he legislated in stages so that people could do what? They could gradually accustom themselves and acclimate themselves to what fasting is. Again, mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Also, he said, كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الصِّيَامُ كَمَا كُتِبَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُم. He legislated or prescribed fasting upon you as he prescribed it upon those who came before you. He didn't ask us to do something which he didn't ask other people to do. Again, another type, another form, or another demonstration of Allah's mercy. Not asking us to do more than other people did, right? Nor, and telling us that what I'm asking you to do, I've asked other people to do as well. From the demonstrations or the indication of Allah's mercy that are present in the prescription of fasting, is he said, أَيَّامًا مَعْدُودَاتٍ. He said a fixed number of days. No, you don't have to fast perpetually. Although I could order you to fast and make that part and parcel of being Muslim. That you're always observing, constantly observing fast. No, I made it what? A fixed number of days. 29 or 30 days once a year. فَمَنْ كَانَ مِنْكُمْ مَرِيضًا أَوْ عَلَى سَفَرٍ فَعِدَّةٌ مِنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخَرٍ. Also, I gave concessions. So people who are traveling, people who are ill, they don't have to fast and can make up the days when they're feeling better and they're no longer traveling. وَعَلَى الَّذِينَ يُطِيقُونَهُ فِدْيَةٌ طَعَامُ مِسْكِينٍ. And as for those who they experience difficulty, extreme hardship for fasting, I excuse them altogether. And they don't even have to fast and can feed a poor person instead of it. And that's also a mercy. Because poor people will be fed in Ramadan. They'll be fed and they won't have to fast a perpetual fast. Another mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so these are some examples of the mercy of Allah in fasting for which he should be thanked. Which is why he said, وَلَعَلَّكُمْ تَشْكُرُونَ. And that you might give thanks, or you might be thankful to Allah. And with that, we will conclude tonight's session. There are a few more ayat to cover related to fasting, and then we'll complete the discussion. And then hopefully the last week before Ramadan. So we have one more Saturday, actually 2 more Saturdays, inshallah ta'ala. So in those 2 Saturdays, we'll hopefully next week complete the commentary on the ayat. And then the last week, just talk about a few important ahkam that we should basically reacquaint ourselves with before the beginning of the month. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect, to preserve, to honor, to bless, and to reward all of you and all of the Muslims. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us from those things we fear, whether that be the disease of corona, some other disease, or some other injury or harm. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless our houses, to bless our spouses, to bless our children, to bless all of the Muslims throughout the world, and to protect them, Ya Rabbal Alameen, Ya Arhamar Rahimin. And with that, we'll bring this to a close. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.